Open your mouth one more time, and I'll show you what real power means.
The shrill shout of a woman's voice shattered the peace of a Saturday morning. The small street in Plano, Texas, where moments before there had only been the hum of a lawnmower, the whir of children pedaling their bikes around the cul-de-sac, and the faint warmth of the sun lingering on freshly cut grass, suddenly froze. Curtains quivered. A few faces peeked through the windows, and the crisp air thickened in an instant, as if a shadow had been thrown over the neighborhood. Right in the middle of the walkway stood Linda Whitfield, president of the neighborhood board, arms folded across her chest. On either side of her loomed two men in black tactical vests, the words "Community Enforcement" stitched clumsily across their chests. They didn't smile, didn't greet, only stared with eyes that tried to feign authority but betrayed how forced it really was. And in that instant, Reginald Carter, a retired federal agent, realized he wasn't facing any real force at all, just a poorly staged act of intimidation. Linda's voice cut through like ice, as if she had been waiting for this moment. "Mr. Carter, we need to talk." One of the men stepped forward, tall, bald, mirrored sunglasses reflecting Reginald's frame. "Community Enforcement," he announced hollowly. "You violated neighborhood regulations. We have the authority to detain you until the police arrive." The words dropped like a stone. Reginald raised his brow, half amused, half incredulous. "Detain me?" His voice was low, almost mocking. Linda's arms tightened across her chest. "You've ignored repeated notices. We can't let you disregard the system any longer. These men are here to make sure you comply." The second man, shorter with a scruffy beard, pulled a crumpled sheet of paper from his pocket. "Property violations, failure to obey board orders, unauthorized driveway repairs, loud gatherings. The list is long." Reginald chuckled softly. "And that gives you the right to storm onto my property and tane the homeowner." The tall one clenched his jaw, his hand hovering near his belt as if hinting at a weapon. The air grew heavier. From nearby homes, curtains shifted again. Silhouettes lingered at windows with cell phones raised. Reginald knew he had become the center of the block. He took a single step forward, calm, but with eyes blazing. "Let me make this clear. There is no such thing as community enforcement in Plano. You're not police. You have no authority. You're trespassers." Linda's face flushed red, her voice nearly breaking into a shout. "Don't lecture me about the law, Reginald. We've had countless complaints. I won't let you undermine order here anymore." The bearded man hesitated, his confidence faltering. The tall one held stiff, as if moving back even half a step would shatter the image of authority he was trying to project. Reginald tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. He had faced worse than this: drug traffickers on the border, cartel hitmen, even foreign spies in disguise. And yet, standing before him now, were just two men hiding behind costumes of borrowed power. He dropped the trash bag he was carrying. A soda can rolled out, clattering across the pavement, a sound that echoed like a signal. It wasn't surrender. It was a declaration this standoff would not end the way Linda expected. All along the row of houses, neighbors pressed against glass panes. A teenager across the street lifted his phone and hit record. What began as a private intimidation act was now turning into a public spectacle. The tall man stepped closer, his voice a growl. "You're resisting. If we have to, we'll use force." Reginald's smile hardened. "Escalation. You're just two men playing soldier. And trust me, the real police will be very interested in this little performance. You have 30 seconds to walk away." Linda bit her lip, nearly blurting out the words, "a man like you." But Reginald caught it in time. His eyes flickered, cold as steel. "Careful with your words, Linda. If this isn't about law, then it's about prejudice." The bearded man swallowed, his voice shaky. "Look, there's no need to make this bigger than it is. Come with us, the police will sort it out." Reginald cut him off sharp and clear. "You mean the real police or the fake badges you bought online?" The question sliced through the act like a blade. Silence pressed down. The tall one's voice dropped guttural. "Don't test me. I'm not joking." But Reginald leaned in slightly, his voice carrying just enough for the whole street to hear. I've faced men far more dangerous than you. Save yourselves before this spins out of control." A flicker of doubt cracked across the tall man's face, arrogance buckling under the weight of his opponent's calm resolve. Linda, desperate, shouted, "We have rules. We have a system. If you won't obey, maybe you don't deserve to live here." Reginald fixed his gaze on her, every word deliberate. Respect can't be forced with threats and imposters. It has to be built on fairness and trust. What you're trying to enforce is control, not law. His words weren't only for Linda. They rang across every home, watching a reminder that false power might fool people for a moment, but real strength and justice could never be hidden. The bearded man muttered under his breath, "Maybe we should move this out to the street." But before he could finish, the tall one shot him a burning glare. "No, we're not going anywhere." Reginald sighed softly, watching their every twitch. He knew their kind men who thrived on intimidation, mistaking fear for authority. And because of that, he knew exactly how to break them without ever raising a fist. He turned his attention back to Linda, voice calm yet razor-sharp. "Have you thought about what happens when the real police show up? And trust me, they're on their way. They won't question me. They'll question you. They'll ask why you thought you had the right to stage a fake arrest in the middle of this street." Color drained from Linda's face, her expression momentarily hollow. Then, from across the street, a voice rang out, "Leave him alone." The shout rippled through the neighborhood like a wave. What started as a personal clash between one resident and the board president had turned into a public confrontation witnessed by an entire community. Reginald held his cold gaze, finishing with quiet finality. "This is your last chance. Walk away before the whole neighborhood sees you in handcuffs." The bearded man trembled while the tall one clenched his fists, unwilling to give up the illusion of authority. But Reginald knew the longer it dragged on, the more the truth exposed itself. Every pair of eyes, every phone camera was turning the quiet street into a public stage. Curtains no longer just swayed windows had been thrown open, doors cracked ajar, neighbors stood on porches with phones held high. Across the street, the Hendersons, an elderly couple, stood with arms folded. Mr. Henderson shook his head loud enough for several homes to hear never seen anything this crazy before. Bringing fake cops into the neighborhood? Mrs. Henderson whispered back, "I told you Linda was bound to go too far." Reginald caught their voices but kept his eyes locked on the two enforcers. He catalogued every detail, their sloppy uniforms, the tall one's eyes darting nervously toward the end of the block as if waiting for backup that would never come. The bearded man's trembling hands itching to bolt. From the sidewalk, Marcus Johnson, the teenager always shooting hoops in his driveway, lifted his phone and shouted, "I'm live streaming this, Mr. Carter. Thousands are watching." The tall man snapped around instantly, voice rough, "Turn it off." He lunged toward the boy. A grave mistake. In a heartbeat, Reginald shifted, placing himself between Marcus and the threat. His voice cut sharp as ice. "You lay a hand on that kid, and this ends right here." The tension coiled tight. The man froze, realizing for the first time that Reginald wasn't afraid. Linda scrambled to recover, blurting, "This is an internal matter. No one else has a say." But her words only fueled the fire. A woman clutching her baby shouted back, "Internal, this looks like intimidation. Where do you get the right to arrest neighbors?" Others piled on, voices rising in protest. The longer Linda and her impostors stood there, the more the ground crumbled beneath them. What they'd meant as intimidation had turned into a public tribunal with dozens of judges recording every second. Reginald let the silence stretch before speaking, his voice steady but booming. "Linda, do you hear this? This isn't order. This is chaos, and you created it." Linda's teeth ground together, but her words wavered. "You're twisting it. You've always been the problem, breaking the standards we built." Reginald tilted his head slowly. "No, Linda. Your problem is confusing control with leadership. And those are never the same." The words struck like a verdict. Around them, neighbors nodded, whispering in agreement. Phones stayed trained on Linda and her henchmen, capturing every beat of sweat, every flicker of doubt. The bearded man wiped his brow and muttered, "We should back off." This isn't worth it. But the tall one barked back, no, it ends here. Straightening his shoulders, he shouted, Last chance. Come with us, or we use force. Reginald let out a short laugh. Do it. Do it in front of this entire block with every camera pointed at you. Go ahead. Let the whole world see who you really are. The tall man faltered. Behind his mirrored lenses, his eyes wavered. Linda jumped in desperately. Don't listen. This is a disciplined community. We have authority. He's bluffing, but her voice drowned under a chorus of outrage. A little boy yelled, We see it all, Mr. Carter. The crowd answered back in unison. And just as the walls closed in, the tall man suddenly pulled a pair of steel handcuffs from his vest. The metallic clink rang sharp, drawing a collective gasp from the street. His voice rumbled, You're under arrest. Resist and I'll cuff you now. Reginald's eyes flashed. He stared at the cuffs, then raised his gaze with words that landed like a hammer. If you take one step with those cuffs, you're committing a crime. Impersonating an officer, false imprisonment. That's real prison time, not play acting. Do you understand? The bearded man panicked, whispering, Eddie, stop. If we cuff him, we're done. But the tall one, Eddie, snapped. Shut up. His name echoed down the street, dragging the truth into daylight. Linda tried to salvage what little control remained, shouting, Don't be afraid. This is a lawful neighborhood. We're right. But her words fell flat. No one believed her anymore. The crowd's anger sharpened into blades. You have no authority, Linda, one man yelled. This isn't enforcement, it's harassment, another added. Reginald leaned slightly toward Eddie, voice low, but cutting like glass. I've cuffed real criminals with real cuffs. And I know when someone's just acting tough. Drop it before you destroy your own life. Eddie's jaw clenched. Pride crashing against the crushing weight of reality. Sean, the bearded one, tugged at his sleeve, pleading, Stop! They're filming everything. We're finished. But Eddie shook him off violently. I'm in control. He stepped forward, cuffs raised like a weapon. The crowd recoiled, shouts splitting the air. Call the cops' phone zoomed in, recording every drop of sweat. Reginald didn't flinch. His shoulders squared, his voice calm but thunderous. You've got one heartbeat left before you ruin your life. Think carefully before you take that step. For the first time, Eddie froze. Sweat rolled down his brow in the harsh Texas sun. His hand trembled just enough for everyone to see the cracks in his fake authority. Linda shrieked in panic. Do it! Don't let him scare you! Cuff him! Show the neighborhood who's in charge! But her outburst only ignited fury. A middle-aged man bellowed back, You're insane, Linda! You're not the police! Reginald seized the moment, his voice rolling steady and commanding. Everyone sees it now. This isn't about rules or violations. This is a charade of false power. And these men are pawns of someone who doesn't know the law, doesn't respect the law, and mistakes intimidation for leadership. Sean dropped his head in shame, whispering, I didn't sign up for this circus. Eddie looked at him, then at Linda, trapped between pride and fear. Reginald stepped half a pace closer, his gaze piercing the mirrored shades. His voice was low but searing. Lay a hand on me and the real police won't need to ask questions. I'll walk them through every crime you've committed in the last 10 minutes. You think you're scaring me? I've dismantled men like you my whole life. The words landed like a hammer to the chest. Eddie froze, arm rigid, the cuffs dangling uselessly. The crowd didn't cheer, but erupted with voices of judgment. Enough. Leave him alone. It's over. The street, once calm and then turned into a battlefield, had become a court of neighbors, and the verdict was clear. Reginald stood tall, his voice calm but unyielding. The game's over. You have no power, no authority. The longer you stand here pretending, the deeper you bury yourselves. Eddie's shoulders sagged, his hand loosening until the cuffs clattered against his thigh. Sean stepped back, face pale as chalk. Linda trembled, her last defense a scream raw and venomous. You never belonged here, you never will. The words ripped through the air so raw that neighbors burst into protest. One voice shouted, Enough, Linda, another cut in. You've shown your true colors. Reginald didn't lose his temper, but disappointment filled his eyes. He looked at Linda for a long moment, then turned back to Eddie and Sean. Here's my last piece of advice. Leave before the next chapter ends with flashing patrol lights, the clink of handcuffs, and an indictment you won't be able to shake. Eddie still clutched the cuffs like a lifeline. Sean looked ready to bolt. Linda stood between them, flushed and screaming into the void. Reginald drew a slow breath, stretched the silence tight, then lowered his voice cold and precise. Eddie, Sean, do you know what it costs to impersonate a federal officer, not neighborhood bylaws, not state code, federal law? A minimum of 3 years in prison, and that's if you're lucky. Behind the mirrored lenses, Eddie's eyes fluttered, his lips moving without sound. Reginald didn't stop. Lay a hand on me and the charges stack: assault, unlawful restraint, conspiracy. Do the math. Sean's eyes went wide. The blood drained from his face. Linda, he's not bluffing. His whisper carried far enough for everyone to hear. Linda snapped back, frantic. Don't listen! He's just trying to scare you. Reginald turned to her, voice low but razor sharp. You've already lost Linda. The whole block sees it. Your neighbors see it. And deep down you see it. The crowd nodded, voices rising in support. A young mother holding her baby said softly, He's right. This is insane. At last, Eddie's grip loosened, the cuffs drooping like scrap metal. But Reginald wasn't finished. He stepped closer, his tone an even, steady warning. Do you know what separates real power from fake power? Accountability. Real officers answer to the law. Imposters answer only to their egos. And that ego, it will land you in a cell or bury you. Eddie lowered his head, sweat running freely, hands trembling beyond control. Reginald lifted his gaze to the neighborhood and spoke clearly. This community deserves respect, leaders who solve problems with fairness, not threats. Linda laughed bitterly and shook her head. Respect. Do you know how much time I've poured into this neighborhood? How many complaints I've carried? People need order, Reginald. Someone has to keep things in line. Reginald answered cleanly, firm as bedrock. Order doesn't come from force, Linda. It comes from trust. And you lost it the moment you brought 2 imposters here to intimidate your neighbors. Eddie swallowed hard and mumbled, Maybe he's right, Linda. We should back off. Linda whipped around and screamed, If we leave now, we lose everything. They'll think I'm weak. Sean snapped, cutting her off. This isn't about your reputation. I'm not going to prison for you. His words rang out angry and final. Then Sean ripped the fabric badge from his chest and flung it onto the concrete. The cheap patch spun and fell, a silent confession. The whole block froze. Breaths hissed through teeth as phones zoomed in. Reginald looked at Eddie, voice low and steady. One man's done. What about you, Eddie? The cuffs clacked against Eddie's thigh as his hands shook. For the first time, the arrogant mask cracked, revealing a scared man behind the shades. Reginald leaned in, almost a whisper. Linda won't be there when the real police start asking questions. She won't sit beside you in court. You'll be alone. Think about it. Everyone understood Eddie wouldn't take a fall for Linda. She'll save herself, Reginald said, voice like a cold blade. And you'll wear real cuffs. Silence draped the street, every ear hanging on the next word. Eddie's hand went slack. The handcuffs hit the concrete with a sharp clang that carried farther than Linda's protest. No, she shrieked, stomping like a child denied candy. Pick them up, don't let him win. But Eddie didn't move. He stepped back, chest heaving, the taste of regret in every breath. Reginald seized the moment, standing tall and facing Linda. Leadership isn't about winning, it's about taking responsibility, and you failed at that. Voices swelled, not applause, but a wave of recognition. He's right. She went too far. We don't need this here. Linda's eyes darted, her face suddenly pale. The power she thought she controlled was slipping faster than a heartbeat. Reginald bent to pick up the cuffs and raise them for the neighborhood to see. This is what happens when people mistake control for justice, when they use fear as a yardstick for respect. This isn't justice. It's a lie. The Texas sun flashed off the metal like an exclamation point. And just when it all seemed to fracture beyond repair, a stubborn shred of Eddie's pride snapped back. He lunged, shouldering past Sean, charging into the space between himself and Reginald. Don't touch him, someone yelled. Phones tilted, frames shaking. Eddie grabbed for Reginald's wrist, trying to drag the cuffs back into play. His last mistake. With a single shift, clean controlled, Reginald slipped aside, trapped the joint, and turned the momentum. Eddie's arm folded back into a safe control hold. The cuffs that had fallen now clicked shut with a crisp snap on Eddie's own wrist. He let out a short cry, more shock than pain, and dropped to one knee. It took less than 3 seconds. He barely hit him, he just moved. Someone breathed, stunned. Reginald didn't gloat. He kept the hold minimal, his voice professional. "It's over. Don't resist. That only makes it worse." Linda shrieked, panicked. "You don't have the right to arrest him," correct Reginald said, cutting her off cool and exact. "I'm not arresting him. I'm detaining him for impersonating law enforcement until real officers arrive. And because he just tried to assault me on my own property, the list of charges is getting longer." The neighbors roared again, some clapping, others turning the hammer of public judgment on Linda. "You staged this. You pushed them into it, Sean." His cheap patch already gone raised both hands and backed toward the curb. "I'm out. I didn't sign up for this. You never told me he was law?" Reginald answered, evenly measured as a line. "That's because she didn't know." Linda faltered. What are you saying?" Holding Eddie with one hand, Reginald pulled a worn leather wallet with the other, flipped it open, and raised it for the block and every camera lens. The gold badge flashed. "I am Special Agent Reginald Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation." The street held its breath. Leaves rustled. Eddie's ragged breathing filled the driveway. Mrs. Henderson gripped her husband's arm and whispered. I knew it, the way he stood was different. Marcus, still live-streaming, shouted, "It's real, he's really FBI, cameras caught it, all the badge, the weight of legitimate authority," and Linda's face as the truth hit. "You walked onto my property with imposters, Linda. You put your neighbors in danger, believing intimidation would give you control." "But you had no idea who you were playing with," Reginald said, eyes never leaving her. "You accuse me of abusing power." Strange words from someone who staged a detention over a homeowners association dispute. "What I'm doing is lawful. What you did is criminal." The murmurs shifted, no longer just surprise, but a ripple of disgust. Linda tried to push back, but every word only dug the hole deeper. Adjusting the control on Eddie's wrist, Reginald turned to the neighbors. "Let's be clear, this isn't about grass height or a driveway. It's about people pretending to have authority so they can impose fear. And that ends today." Eddie groaned softly. His tough exterior shattered. Sean lingered at the curb, looking like he wanted to melt into the shade. "You're making a spectacle, humiliating me," Linda screamed, clinging to the last thread of her pride. Reginald's face softened, but his voice was still forged from steel. "No, Linda. You did that yourself. You let your ego blind your judgment, and you put this whole neighborhood at risk just because you were afraid of losing control." Phones kept recording evidence, stacking, undeniable. His badge caught the sunlight again, a flashing milestone marking how the game had completely flipped. "One last thing you need to understand," he said, his voice low but heavy with weight. "Real power doesn't come from fear. It comes from service, protecting people, not threatening them. When you impersonate authority and cross that line, there is always a price to pay." Linda shook her head, resistance crumbling. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. You have no right to fight back." Reginald locked eyes with her, the words dropping like a judge's gavel. "That's because you never imagined meeting someone who knew what real power looks like." Silence cloaked the street again. Camera lenses zoomed closer. What began as a petty HOA spectacle had transformed into a story fit for national headlines. But the play still had a final act, because the wail of sirens rolled down the street, cutting through the Texas heat like a warning bell. Red and blue strobes grew larger, washing over porches as neighbors shifted, phones raised high, waiting for the moment of reckoning. Eddie knelt in the driveway, cuffed and stripped of arrogance. Sean pressed against the curb, clutching his head, cursing under his breath. Linda, face pale, voice trembling, clung to her title. They'll side with me. They know I'm the HOA president holding Eddie steady. With the ease of long habit, Reginald answered as if stating a fact. What they know is you brought imposters to threaten residents, and they'll know it because this entire neighborhood saw it. He jerked his chin toward the crowd. Every phone here is a piece of evidence. Panic flickered across Linda's eyes. It was true, from porch to window everyone was recording. Some whispered into their phones, likely live streaming. Others simply filmed in silence, catching every trace of fear across her face. The Hendersons still stood firm on their porch like seasoned witnesses to a trial. With flashing lights closing in, the issue had shifted. No longer about grass too high or a driveway repair. Now it was a lesson carved into the street. When fear pretends to be law, the community becomes the court, and truth delivers the verdict. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson shook their heads, murmuring, "It's over, Linda. All of it's on tape." Reginald leaned toward Eddie, who trembled in the cuffs. His voice was low, but cutting. "Sit still. When the police arrive, I'll hand you over. Don't make this worse." Eddie didn't argue. The fire in his eyes had gone out, leaving only dread for what waited under those flashing lights. The crowd stirred as 2 patrol cars rolled up, tires squealing lightly against asphalt blocking the street. Doors swung open, officers stepped out, hands close to their belts, scanning the scene. "Hands up," one barked. Reginald immediately raised one hand, keeping the other firm on Eddie. His voice rang clear and controlled. "Special Agent Reginald Carter, FBI. My badge is in my wallet, ready to present. This man is impersonating law enforcement and assaulted me on my property." The officers hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking from the gleaming badge in his worn wallet to the crowd of neighbors and dozens of cameras recording. A broad-shouldered officer with dark hair, Officer Ramirez, stepped forward. "Let me see your credentials, sir." Reginald nodded, produced his ID, and handed it over. Ramirez studied it carefully. Suspicion faded into respect. "All right, we'll take him into custody." The crowd erupted again, a mixture of relief and electric excitement. Cameras tightened in as Eddie was hauled to his feet, cuffed behind his back, and marched to the squad car. Linda broke down, sobbing with rage. "No, not him, Reginald's the liar. You have to believe me." A young female officer, Officer Green, stepped in, her voice sharp as a blade. "Ma'am, we've got a street full of witnesses. From what I see, this doesn't look good. Did you authorize them to impersonate law enforcement?" Linda's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Neighbors shouted over her. "You called them here. We saw you order them to grab him." Green's tone hardened. "Step back, ma'am. Interfere again and you'll be treated as obstructing an officer." Linda's shoulders sagged, her authority collapsing into nothing under the pulsing lights. Reginald stood tall on the porch steps, unmoved, his presence more commanding than Linda's panicked flailing. Eddie was locked in the squad car. Sean lingered near the curb, hands raised. "I didn't touch anyone. I swear I just want to go home." Another officer barked, "You'll need to give a statement. Don't move." The neighborhood was no longer silent. People whispered, sighed in relief. Children clutched their parents' hands wide-eyed, learning their first lesson about false power and truth. Reginald spoke, his voice carrying to every home. This is why fear cannot lead. Real power doesn't hide behind fake uniforms or empty threats. Real power protects. Real power serves. And real power always answers to the truth. Green looked at him with open respect. But Linda still refused to let go, screaming one last time, "You think you've won, Reginald? Men like you don't belong here." The block roared back in fury. "Enough, Linda. We heard everything. You've lost all respect." Reginald never raised his voice. He only looked at her with disappointment and said, firm and final, "You just told everyone who you really are. And that memory will follow you long after I've said my last word." Linda trembled suddenly, a stranger in the neighborhood she once ruled like a kingdom. Sean stammered, I'll talk. I don't want this going any further." Ramirez nodded, signaling an officer to take his statement. Reginald exhaled, letting tension drain at last. Neighbors clapped sporadically, some shouting, "You handled it better than anyone could." He didn't answer, only turned to Ramirez. "What happens next?" Ramirez adjusted his cap, his voice steady. We've confirmed your badge through dispatch. You acted by the book. And with this much evidence from neighbors' cameras to our body cams, the prosecutor's office has a solid case: impersonation, coercion, trespassing, conspiracy. And Linda. He glanced at the woman being led away. She won't walk away from this. The crowd murmured as if a public trial had reached its end. A regular morning in Plano had turned into proof carved in daylight. The law doesn't lie in the hands of those wearing fake badges. It lies in the truth and in those with the courage to stand for it. And that truth the entire neighborhood had witnessed with their own eyes. The police wrapped up the procedure. We'll detain Eddie and Linda, take their statements, and file charges. Sean, depending on the extent of his cooperation, will be left for the court to decide. Agent Carter, you may be called as a witness. Reginald nodded. That's fine. What matters is this neighborhood is safe again. His eyes swept across his neighbors, meeting gazes filled with a mix of respect and relief. Officer Green stepped closer, lowering her voice. Honestly, we rarely arrive at a scene where the suspects are already cuffed and under control. You made our job a whole lot easier. Reginald kept his voice professional. I didn't want bloodshed. The goal is always control without chaos. But deep inside, he recognized the paradox: this neighborhood had never been as peaceful as it appeared. For years, Linda had ruled with an iron fist disguised as community leadership. That afternoon, her mask had shattered before everyone's eyes. The Hendersons whispered to each other, their eyes still fixed on Reginald. He's not just a neighbor anymore, Mrs. Henderson murmured. He's the man who protected us from her. Her husband nodded. People will remember. As the patrol cars rolled away, one carrying Eddie, the other, Linda, the crowd remained. Red and blue lights splashed across the brick walls, a lasting mark that the neighborhood had changed in a single afternoon. Reginald stood tall, watching them go. He hadn't chosen this, but he knew the aftershocks had only just begun. In the days that followed, Plano lived under a magnifying glass. The sirens were gone, but tension still lingered. The video from Reginald's driveway spread like wildfire onto local Facebook groups, the Nextdoor app, even the Dallas Evening News. Headlines read, HOA president jailed after confrontation with FBI agent in suburban street showdown. For residents who had quietly resented Linda for years, it was a relief. On Sunday morning, Mrs. Henderson waved from her porch. You did something good for this neighborhood. Don't forget that others said nothing but their looks were enough. Some regarded Reginald with newfound respect. Others hesitated, struggling to believe the man who waved while mowing his lawn was the same agent who had faced danger countless times. Linda's house had dark curtains drawn, her car gone. By Tuesday, the HOA board sent an email emergency meeting scheduled to address recent events and determine new leadership. Everyone understood Linda's reign was over. News about Eddie surfaced: 2 petty crimes, disorderly conduct, unpaid fines. A man hungry for authority but built on nothing. Sean, meanwhile, spilled everything: how Linda had lured them with promises of payment, flattered them as community protectors, and pushed them into confronting Reginald. The truth disgusted the neighbors. Linda had complained about Reginald for months, hinting he didn't fit the neighborhood. By Wednesday, a group of residents gathered at the park for an informal meeting. Reginald had only meant to jog past, but voices called out, Agent Carter. Thank you. You exposed everything. He stopped, breathing evenly, shaking his head. I didn't do it for recognition. I did it because it was right. I live here. My family lives here. I won't let this neighborhood be ruled by intimidation. A woman holding her daughter stepped forward. But for us, it means more. You showed us fear only has power if we allow it. Linda made us feel small for years. No one dared to stand up until now. Reginald bent down, eye level with the little girl. Remember, this bullies are only strong when good people stay silent. When we stand tall and tell the truth, fear loses its grip. The story didn't stop in Plano. By Friday, a national morning show replayed the clip of Reginald holding his badge while Eddie sat cuffed. The anchor called it the moment truth shattered false power. But Reginald stayed away from the spotlight. When reporters came knocking, he declined. This isn't about me. It's about transparency. Still, he knew inside the lesson mattered as much as any FBI operation he had ever worked. Abuse of power, whether on a grand stage or a quiet street, always left scars. At the next HOA meeting, the board voted unanimously to remove Linda. The president's chair sat empty, a symbol of collapse. A new leader was chosen, humble, promising transparency and cooperation. But the wound remained. Neighbors would not forget the day their leader turned rules into weapons. Parents used it as a story to teach their kids. A nearby elementary teacher retold it in class, weaving lessons of honesty and responsibility. For Reginald, the meaning wasn't in Linda's downfall, but in the conversations that followed. Neighbors opened up talking about what community really meant, what true leadership looked like, and why accountability mattered. One evening, while watering his lawn, Reginald saw Marcus, the boy who had live-streamed Run Up. Mr. Carter, the video, hit 1 million views. Everyone's calling you a hero. Reginald smiled faintly. I'm not a hero, Marcus. I just refuse to be bullied. Marcus nodded. But you showed us how. Reginald looked down the street, children laughing, neighbors chatting on porches again. The place wasn't perfect, but it felt lighter, freer. Maybe that's the real victory, he said quietly. By Saturday morning, exactly 1 week later, Plano had settled back into its routine trimmed lawns, kids racing bikes, parents no longer peeking nervously through curtains. But the memory lingered. Anyone walking past Reginald's driveway paused like it was a landmark. The place where truth stood taller than threats. Reginald remained the same coffee cup in hand, leaning on his porch, watching the neighborhood wake. He didn't seek attention, but attention found him greetings, nods of thanks, respectful glances, even from those once distant. Because in the end, this little neighborhood had learned something far greater. Law and truth never belonged to those who borrow the clothes of power. They belonged to the people willing to stand and protect their community from the shadows. By then, neighbors gave Reginald nods of acknowledgement, though he didn't take it as honor. What filled his mind wasn't pride, but the lesson he wanted to leave behind. That afternoon, the HOA board called an emergency gathering at the community park. Word spread fast, and nearly every household sent someone. Folding chairs lined the grass, children played, adults murmured with anticipation. When Reginald arrived, the chatter stilled. He hadn't come as a speaker, just a neighbor. But Harold Jennings, the newly elected interim president, asked him to address the group. Reginald hesitated a moment, then stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice, but everyone leaned in. Last week, he began, we saw what happens when authority is faked, when power is used to intimidate instead of protect. And the truth is, it could have ended very differently. Someone could have been hurt. Kids were watching, phones were recording, and lives could have been ruined far worse than they already were. He paused, scanning the faces, some solemn, some curious, some ashamed. What I want you to take away from that moment isn't about me. It isn't about the FBI. It's about the kind of neighborhood we want to live in. Do we want fear to rule us or respect and responsibility? His words echoed, sending a wave of agreement through the crowd. Reginald continued. Leadership is not control. Leadership is service. And service means putting others first, even when it's inconvenient, even when no one thanks you. That is the line between true authority and arrogance. From the back row, a hand went up. Mrs. Henderson, her voice still strong and clear. Agent Carter, if something like this happens again, what should we do? He answered without hesitation. Stand together, speak up. Don't let fear divide you. The only reason those men thought they could pull this off was because they believed the neighborhood would stay silent. Silence is the soil where bullies grow. But when truth is spoken, when light hits the lie, the game is over. At first the applause was scattered, then it surged. Parents bent down to whisper into their children's ears. Marcus and his group of teens stood in the back, phones lifted, live streaming the moment. Reginald caught Marcus's eye, his look half stern, half warm. Keep posting your videos, son, but remember, don't do it just for the drama. Use your platform to spread the truth, to show people what responsibility looks like. Marcus grinned wide. Yes, sir, that's exactly what I plan to do. The meeting ended, but no one rushed home. Neighbors lingered, striking up conversations they hadn't had in years. Strangers shook hands. Families asked after one another. The tension that had once smothered the block dissolved into a new thread of connection. That evening, as Reginald returned home, the sun dipped low, pouring golden light across the quiet street. He paused at the very driveway that had once held the chaos. In his mind, he still heard the snap of the cuffs, Linda's shouts, the red and blue lights flashing. But now that place stood as a turning point. He remembered his years in the FBI, endless briefings, dangerous missions staring into the eyes of men who thrived on fear. And he realized sometimes the most important battles don't happen in faraway cities or dark alleys. They happen on the very streets where children play and families build their lives. He whispered almost like a prayer, "The truth will come to light." The laughter of children drifted from the end of the block, pulling him back to the present. He smiled faintly, lifted an empty trash bin from the curb, and wheeled it into the garage. Life had to go on, and that was the real meaning of it all. For those who had witnessed it, the lesson was unmistakable. Power doesn't come from titles, threats, or fear. It comes from honesty, responsibility, and the courage to stand firm when it matters most. And if you're listening to this story, ask yourself in your community, in your own life, are you building on fear or on respect? Are you staying silent or daring to speak the truth when it's hardest? That is the choice every one of us must face, badge or no badge. And if this story has made you reflect on leadership, on community, on the true meaning of power, hit subscribe. Because sometimes the fight for justice isn't far away at all. It's right here in the place we call home.